Kevin Durant has just been traded to the Phoenix Suns in exchange for Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, and a boatload of unprotected first-round picks. It is 1 a.m. They had to report this trade at 1 a.m. for some reason, so let's just get into it. Real quick, if you ended up enjoying this video, please be sure to like and subscribe for more of these videos. Drop that like to help the video do better in the YouTube algorithm. It is much appreciated. So, as I mentioned in the intro, this trade package is Cameron Johnson, Mikal Bridges, I believe Jay Crowder as well for some salary filler and maybe some more salary filler in there, as well as I believe it was 4 unprotected first-round picks. So, first thing I want to say is that this video is going to be pretty much dedicated to the Phoenix Suns for the most part. I have plenty of thoughts about the Brooklyn Nets situation, but that video is going to be coming at a later date. Should be like 2 videos from now. Right now, though, I want to talk about what pretty much everyone wants to talk about, which is what Kevin Durant is going to look like on the Phoenix Suns. Although I first just have to say, good God, like Jesus, that came out of nowhere. I was in the middle of watching a movie with people and just all of our phones got notifications, and I'm with a bunch of content creators and we all just ran to a bunch of different corners to record our videos. 3 Cone, if you know who he is, just recorded his Durant video in my drum room. But anywho, yeah, this trade was a huge shock, and anytime that you make a trade of this magnitude with a player of Kevin Durant's caliber, it's gonna send shockwaves through the league. In terms of what there is to actually talk about that, it's also another thing that's of huge note is what this actually means for the league at large, because with a player like Kevin Durant on the move, and specifically on the move to a team that has had at least championship attending level team, you know, like that core there, they have a history, they have achieved it at that level before, and now they are adding Kevin Durant to that equation. Now, I understand, of course, that Phoenix has not been as great this year. However, I would chalk that up primarily to injury, as well as Chris Paul's aging, which Chris Paul's aging was going to be a huge problem, but now if you have Chris Paul as the 3rd best, should be 4th best, but is 3rd best player on this team, or maybe he's not, who knows. That's a lot more comfortable, and that's a lot more fitting, and it's okay that Chris Paul can't really shot create all that much anymore, because they don't really need him to do that like they used to, because they have potentially the greatest shot creator who's ever touched a basketball. So Chris Paul, the pressure that's taken off of him is one of the things that I think of immediately. And then really the pressure that's taken off of Devin Booker, because I've talked about this in my Phoenix Suns video, that Devin Booker has had to pull off a serious case of a carry job this year a handful of times. And very often you'll tune into a Phoenix Suns game, and the only reason that they won that game is because Booker had like a 40 piece. And that's an exhausting way to play basketball, and a way that ultimately does not have a good track record in the winning department. Like, you can drag your team to wins that way, but you are not going to win at the highest level doing anything that you would describe as dragging. That was not a good situation to be in. Now he's got a guy who can score the ball even better than he can on his team. So that pressure is gone. And even for DeAndre Ayton, while I do worry about what this means for his shots, because he's already shooting the ball less than I want him to, not that that's new from anything else that he ever does. He's pretty much always like that. But with that worry being there, at the same time, having that play finisher in the paint, the amount of opportunity that he's going to get off of the gravity of those scoring options, it's going to be quite ridiculous. And one thing that I talked about in my Kyrie video, when I talked about what he was going to mean for the Mavericks, I mentioned this concept that traditionally speaking, historically, if you make a trade for a player at the trade deadline, even if it's a big star player, typically speaking, that does not yield results at the highest level. Like, generally, if you trade for some star player and you're like, we're gonna go all the way this year, you're probably not if that happened in the middle of the season. That's because of training camps, chemistry, not having history with these players, adjusting to playing maybe even a new conference and against new teams. All kinds of factors in there, and because of that, generally doesn't really happen. But this is Kevin Durant, And I don't think the same rules really apply when you're Kevin Durant. That's just kind of the way that it is when you're this caliber of player. In fact, I'm trying to think of another trade in history that happened at the trade deadline that involved a player of Kevin Durant's caliber. When's the last time that a player that you could genuinely consider as the best player in the league and not be looked at as crazy, when's the last time that player got moved? A, period, but B, especially at the trade deadline. It's just not something that really happens. Generally, for a trade like that, teams are going to wait into the offseason, A, to make sure they get a good deal, because rushing a move for the deadline doesn't necessarily ensure that. And the second thing is that it also allows for more freedom in the offseason. Like, you have more open roster spots, you have more cap space, and you have more time to just negotiate these deals and make sure you can take on as many assets as possible, because when you're trading for someone like Kevin Durant, you're probably going to be loading up on the assets, and that's pretty much exactly what is happening in Brooklyn, although they managed to trade for not that many players in the process so that they didn't have to worry about roster spots and things like that. And ultimately, the picks that Phoenix gave them were pretty fruitful and good picks, so I don't know that they necessarily would have benefited that significantly from waiting. So I guess from that perspective, not a bad decision on the Brooklyn's part to just decide to end it here. I do think for Brooklyn, just to throw this out there real quick, because I don't want to focus on them too much, a little bit sad. It's a little bit sad that this went the way that it did, being that things were starting to look like they were turning up. Like, I made a video titled "I Was Wrong About the Nets." Turns out I definitely wasn't, because even when things started to go good, as I had predicted in the past, they always find a way to go bad. And if you told me 2 months ago that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving would be on different basketball teams by the deadline, I would not have believed you. But here we are, and now it's entirely believable. Although a bit shocking, because again, I was just expecting them to hold off that move for the deadline. Or sorry, for the offseason. I almost feel silly focusing or talking about in any way what the Phoenix Suns can do with this offensively, because I feel as though it's as obvious as it can be. Like, really, they're just going to jack up a bunch of mid-range shots. Like, between these three players rather, you have two of the greatest mid-range shooters of all time, and another one who is probably going to be somewhere in that conversation by the time his career is done. So from a shot creation perspective, really doesn't get much better than that. I mentioned earlier DeAndre Ayton as a finisher in the paint, the amount of opportunities he's going to get, the amount of easy dump-off passes. Like, they're probably going to be a really strong paint team specifically because of him. He's also going to be feasting off of screens because he has multiple guys who can shot create and pass out of the pick and roll. Kevin Durant is really good at pick and roll and handoff action and stuff like that, and DeAndre Ayton could definitely benefit from it. And really, when you put a scorer like Kevin Durant on the floor, that just benefits everybody. Like, it automatically opens things up for everyone. Even Devin Booker is going to get less defensive attention now because you have to account for Kevin Durant. And that is why these players go for the price that they do, because it's essentially a cheat code. I would not be shocked in the slightest if Phoenix ended up having the #1 offense in basketball to close out this year with Kevin Durant. And really, the matter of whether or not this team wins a championship or even competes for one, although I think that one's almost all but guaranteed. But if they're going to actually win, I think that comes down to their defense, because really looking at what that starting lineup is going to be, although we don't really know who the other forward is going to be, and that's really an issue of concern as well as depth and all that, as well as defensive depth specifically. But Chris Paul, in his old age, not the defender he used to be, but still cool. Devin Booker's a really good and often underrated defender because his old reputation of bad defense has preceded him more than is even remotely deserving. Again, Kevin Durant has been cool, and he's been much better defensively, especially this year. Been really, really good, actually. And DeAndre Ayton's cool. And, you know, who knows who the forward that you end up starting, who that ends up being. Maybe the Nets buy out Dorian Finney-Smith. Wouldn't that just be hilarious? No, I think it's going to come down to defense, really. Phoenix, if they can be a top 15 and especially top 10 defense, I would really find it hard to bet against them. This trade really changes everything. And for the other contenders in the league, I would be quite scared of what is happening right now. That's not a team that I want to run into. And this has just, the NBA's landscape has changed so dramatically over the last couple of days. This is probably the greatest trade deadline that there's ever been. I don't know if there's another one I can think of that competes with it. Definitely not in my time as a fan. But yeah, shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye. Kevin Durant has just been traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder. What the fuck?